They called him insane, a wild man, a creature, a monster who couldn't speak, a wrestler who tore apart turnbuckles with his teeth and ate the stuffing like a crazed animal. Fans screamed when he appeared. Children hid behind their parents. Commentators acted as if something had escaped from a cage, but none of it was real, because behind the green tongue, behind the hairy body, behind the terrifying eyes, was one of the smartest and kindest men professional wrestling had ever seen. That's why the story of George the Animal Steele is one of the most unbelievable in wrestling history. The man millions thought was completely out of control was actually a school teacher, a respected educator, a husband, a mentor, and one of the most intelligent performers in the wrestling business. Yet somehow, he convinced the world he was an uncontrollable beast. This is the story of the wrestler who made fans believe he was crazy and became one of the most beloved legends of all time. Before he was George Steele, before he was the Animal, he was Jim Myers. Born in Michigan in 1937, Myers grew up during a very different era of wrestling. This wasn't the glamorous television business fans know today. This was the territory era. A brutal world where wrestlers traveled thousands of miles, worked nearly every night, and earned respect the hard way. But wrestling wasn't his first passion. Education was. Myers attended college, became a teacher, and eventually worked as a high school educator and coach. Think about that for a second. The same man who would later bite turnbuckles on national television spent his days teaching students in a classroom. And nobody knew. Many of his students had no idea their teacher transformed into a wrestling monster at night. During the day, he was respected, professional, intelligent. At night, he became someone entirely different. And that double life eventually created one of wrestling's greatest characters. When Myers entered professional wrestling, promoters quickly noticed something unique. He didn't look like a traditional athlete. He wasn't conventionally handsome. He wasn't polished. He looked dangerous. Real dangerous. Promoters realized they could turn that appearance into money. And that's exactly what happened. The transformation into George the Animal Steele began. The gimmick was simple. He wasn't meant to act like a wrestler. He was meant to act like a creature. A man so wild he barely understood civilization. A man who couldn't communicate normally. A man who lived entirely on instinct. Steele committed to that role better than almost anyone in wrestling history. He would grow his hair out, stare with wide eyes, make strange noises, attack opponents without warning, and most famously, he would tear apart turnbuckles and eat the stuffing. Fans had never seen anything like it. Today, wrestling audiences are used to elaborate characters. Back then, George Steele looked genuinely disturbing. People believed he was dangerous. Many fans weren't sure where the character ended and reality began. That's how convincing he was. And it worked. Everywhere he went, crowds reacted. They booed. They screamed. They laughed nervously. But most importantly, they paid attention. In professional wrestling, that's the ultimate goal. And few performers commanded attention like George Steele. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, Steele had become one of wrestling's most recognizable villains. He wasn't a world champion. He wasn't always the main event. But he was unforgettable. And sometimes being unforgettable is even more valuable. Fans could forget matches. They could forget championships. But nobody forgot seeing George Steele destroy a turnbuckle for the first time. Nobody forgot those wild eyes. Nobody forgot the green tongue hanging from his mouth. Everything about him felt larger than life. Yet behind the scenes, fellow wrestlers knew the truth. The terrifying monster was actually one of the nicest men in the business. Wrestlers frequently spoke about his intelligence, his professionalism, his kindness, and his willingness to help younger talent. The contrast was unbelievable. Imagine spending the afternoon discussing education and literature with George Steele backstage, then watching him walk through the curtain and become a complete madman in front of thousands of fans. That level of commitment is rare, very rare, and it helped transform him into a wrestling icon. Then came the period that would make him famous worldwide, the WWF expansion era. The mid-1980s changed everything. Under Vince McMahon's leadership, wrestling exploded into mainstream culture. Television audiences grew, pay-per-view events expanded, wrestlers became celebrities, and George Steele found himself performing in front of bigger audiences than ever before. But something unexpected happened. The monster fans had spent years booing started becoming lovable. It began gradually. Crowds started laughing at his antics. Children became fascinated by him. People realized there was something strangely charming about the animal. Then one storyline changed everything. His obsession with Miss Elizabeth. What could have been a ridiculous angle became one of wrestling's most memorable stories. George Steele became completely captivated by Elizabeth, not in a threatening way. More like a giant, confused child who didn't know how to express admiration. The audience loved it. Every time Elizabeth appeared, Steele's behavior changed. The fearsome monster suddenly became vulnerable, awkward, almost innocent, and fans couldn't get enough of it. For the first time, people saw another side of the animal. Not just the monster, the man underneath. It was wrestling storytelling at its best, and it transformed George Steele from a villain into one of the most beloved characters in the company. The crowds that once booed him now cheered him. The monster had become a hero. Few wrestlers have ever made that transition so successfully. It wasn't because he changed who he was. It was because fans finally connected emotionally with the character. That's the secret of great wrestling. Emotion matters more than anything. George Steele understood that better than most. One of the defining moments of his career came at WrestleMania 2. Standing across from him was one of wrestling's most famous villains, Randy Savage. Savage was quickly moving towards superstardom. His arrogance made fans furious, and his relationship with Miss Elizabeth created perfect tension. When Steele challenged Savage for the Intercontinental Championship, fans were emotionally invested, not because they expected a technical masterpiece, not because they expected a 5-star match. They wanted to see George Steele succeed. They cared. That emotional connection is something many wrestlers spend their entire careers chasing. Steele achieved it through character work, through storytelling, through making people feel something. And decades later, fans still remember that feud. That tells you everything you need to know. But wrestling was not the only place where George Steele found success. In 1994, he appeared in a role that introduced him to a different audience. The movie Ed Wood, directed by Tim Burton and starring Johnny Depp. Steele portrayed the legendary wrestler and actor Tor Johnson. The performance surprised many people. For years, audiences had seen George Steele as a cartoonish wrestling character, but in Ed Wood, he showed genuine acting ability. Critics praised the film, and many viewers discovered something they never expected. The animal had range. The man who spent decades pretending to be uncontrollably wild could actually deliver a nuanced performance. It was another reminder of the intelligence behind the character, because that's the fascinating thing about George Steele. The public image was completely different from reality. The more people learned about him, the more remarkable his story became. Many wrestlers build careers by convincing fans they're tougher than they really are. George Steele did the opposite. He convinced fans he was less intelligent than he actually was. Much less. In reality, he was highly educated, articulate, thoughtful, and respected by nearly everyone who worked with him. Perhaps that's why so many wrestlers admired him. They understood how difficult his role truly was. Anyone can pretend to be tough. Few people can convincingly portray complete unpredictability for decades. George Steele mastered it. He understood every movement, every facial expression, every strange noise. Everything had a purpose. Nothing was accidental. That level of performance requires intelligence. A lot of intelligence. As wrestling evolved through the 1990s and 2010s, George Steele's legacy only grew stronger. New generations discovered his work. Veteran wrestlers shared stories about him. Fans continued to share memories, and his influence remained visible. Many modern wrestling characters owe something to George Steele, not necessarily by copying him directly, but by understanding the lesson he taught. Characters matter. Memorable personalities matter. Being different matters. In an industry filled with athletes, George Steele became unforgettable because he embraced uniqueness. Nobody could replace him. Nobody could duplicate him. There was only one animal, and that's why his legacy survived long after his active career ended. Eventually, recognition arrived. The wrestling world acknowledged his contributions, his impact, his importance. In 1995, George Steele was inducted into the prestigious WWE Hall of Fame. For many fans, it felt inevitable. His career had touched multiple generations. He had entertained millions, and he had helped define an era. The Hall of Fame was not just a recognition of matches. It recognized creativity, character work, storytelling, everything that made George Steele special. Yet perhaps the most remarkable part of his story was not the fame, or the championships he chased, or the iconic moments. It was the respect. Talk to people who knew him. Listen to wrestlers who shared locker rooms with him. Read stories from former students. The same themes appear repeatedly: kindness, humility, intelligence, generosity. Those qualities mattered more than any wrestling accomplishment. Because eventually, every career ends. Every match becomes history. Every championship changes hands. What remains is how people remember you. And George Steele left behind memories that went far beyond wrestling. He inspired people, entertained people, helped people, and proved something important. Never judge someone by appearances. The man who looked like a monster was actually a teacher. The man who acted insane was highly intelligent. The man who terrified audiences was known for his kindness. It's one of the greatest contradictions in wrestling history, and perhaps one of the most beautiful. On February 16, 2017, the wrestling world lost George Steele. He was 79 years old. Tributes poured in from everywhere. Fans shared memories. Wrestlers honored him. Friends reflected on the incredible life he lived. And once again, the same message appeared. George Steele was not just a memorable performer. He was a genuinely good man. Years later, his legacy continues. Fans still laugh when they see him eating turnbuckle stuffing. They still smile when they remember his affection for Miss Elizabeth. They still marvel at the idea that the animal was secretly a schoolteacher. And that's why George Steele remains timeless, because he represented something wrestling desperately needs: originality, authenticity, commitment. He was not trying to be the next anybody. He was not copying trends. He was not chasing popularity. He created something uniquely his own, something so memorable that decades later, people still talk about it. In a business filled with champions, legends, and icons, George the Animal Steele achieved something even rarer. He became unforgettable, not because he held the biggest titles, not because he headlined every event, not because he was the strongest or fastest wrestler in the world, but because whenever he appeared, nobody could take their eyes off him. The wild eyes, the green tongue, the torn turnbuckles, the strange sounds, the impossible to ignore presence. It all added up to one of the most unique characters professional wrestling has ever seen. A monster who was actually a teacher, a beast who was actually a gentleman, a wrestler who fooled the world, and in doing so, became a legend forever. George the Animal Steele was not just one of wrestling's greatest characters. He was proof that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones hiding behind the most unbelievable masks.